How do planes fly without going into space? If the Earth were really a sphere with a circumference of 40,000 kilometers, the pilots of the planes would have to constantly correct the altitude down so that they would not fly directly into outer space. A pilot who just wants to maintain his altitude at a normal cruising speed of 800 kilometers per hour, should constantly lower the muzzle of the plane and descend almost 700 meters every minute. Otherwise, without this compensation, in just 1 hour, the pilot would be 50 kilometers higher than he should be. Tycho Brahe, Danish astronomer and mathematician who died in Prague in 1601, revolutionizing astronomy with measurements that exceeded all astronomical measurements prior to the invention of the telescope, famously contradicted the heliocentric theory of his time. Brahe argued that if the Earth revolved around the Sun, it would be impossible not to notice that the position of the stars changes. The mathematician argued that the stars should appear to move away as we approach them and approach as we move away. In fact, after 300 million kilometers of supposed orbit around the Sun, no centimeter of parallax can be detected in stars, which show that we have not moved at all and that the Earth does not revolve around the Sun. If the Earth is really constantly rotating eastward, at over 1,600 kilometers, h, then a vertical shotgun or projectile should fall significantly further west. However, each time this was tested, a cannon dropped the projectile an average of 14 seconds upwards, 14 seconds downwards, after which it returned to the ground, less than half a meter away from the cannon, or sometimes directly into the barrel of the cannon that propelled it. If the Earth were to really rotate steadily eastward at over 1,600 kilometers, h, then helicopters and hot air balloons would simply be able to hover over the Earth, waiting for destinations to come to them. Fans of the idea that the Earth is round often claim that gravity inexplicably attracts the Earth's lower atmosphere, in perfect synchronization to an indeterminate height. At which this atmosphere that accelerates progressively and meets empty, non-gravitational space. Atmosphere of infinite vacuum space. Such theories are unmasked by a simple rain, fireworks, birds, clouds, geese, smoke, and projectiles that would all behave differently if the Earth were a globe. If gravity is credited with being strong enough to hold the oceans, buildings, people, and atmosphere close to the surface of a rotating sphere, then it is impossible for gravity to be simultaneously and weak enough to allow birds, beetles, or airplanes to travel freely, unobstructed in any direction. If gravity is strong enough to bend the massive expanse of the oceans, it would be impossible for fish and other creatures to swim through such constrained water. Of the Earth and their calculations, the most popular navigation methods, plain sailing or great circle sailing, use the plane, not spherical trigonometry, and do all the mathematical calculations based on the assumption that the Earth is perfectly flat. If, on the contrary, the Earth were a sphere, our based ship captains would lead to inaccuracies impossible to ignore. The horizon always appears perfectly flat, 360 degrees around, regardless of altitude. All amateur balloon, airplane or drone footage shows us a perfectly flat horizon at over 30 kilometers high. Only in NASA photos does the curvature of the Earth appear. And those photos are false. The natural state of the water is to find and maintain its own level. If the Earth were a huge, sloping sphere, spinning and floating in infinite space, there could be no truly flat surfaces here. But since the Earth is flat as a pancake, this fundamental physical property of fluids that tend to find and maintain its level, it is consistent with experience and common sense. If the Earth were a spinning sphere, then many of these rivers would be impossible to flow up the hill. This is also the case with the Mississippi River, which flows for nearly 3,800 kilometers and should climb 17 kilometers before reaching the Gulf of Mexico, with a drop of only 30 centimeters. In some sections of the Congo, West Africa, depending on the supposed tilt and movement of the Earth, the Nile would sometimes flow up and sometimes down, as in the case of other long rivers such as Paraná or Paraguay. Cadastre specialists, engineers and architects should never take into account the supposed curvature of the Earth when carrying out a project. Canals, railways, bridges and tunnels are, for example, laid horizontally, often for hundreds of kilometers, with no tolerance for curvature. The Suez Canal, for example, which connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, is 163 kilometers long without blockages or interruptions, practically connecting the two seas. When it was built, the supposed curvature of the Earth was not taken into account. It was dug along a horizontal reference line, almost 8 meters below sea level, crossing several lakes from one sea to another, the line of reference and the surface of the water being perfectly parallel during the 163 kilometers. Engineer W. Winkler once said in the Earth Review about the alleged curvature of the Earth that, As an experienced engineer, I saw that this tolerance exists only in textbooks. No engineer would dream of applying something like this in projects. I designed many railways and canals, and this tolerance was not even thought of, much less allowed. This tolerance to the curvature of the Earth is 20 centimeters at first 1.6 kilometers, which will then increase in relation to the square of the distance in kilometers. A waterway of 48 kilometers would have, applying the above rule, a tolerance of almost 183 meters. Engineers are not so stupid. Such a thing is not allowed. The film also states, the authors point out that all engineers are aware of the idea that locomotives, for example, are designed to operate 10% in a straight line, or that it is physically impossible to have trains circulating on spherical curves.
English translations of that is, friend, do this.